from pen to paper. And tonight we're going to be talking about plot outlines, types of authors, writing careers, and conflict within stories. A little glitch there. And we're going to start out with plot outlines. We got a lot of stuff to cover tonight, so I'm going to be brief and try not to crack too many jokes and stuff like that. Okay. So, first part is the structure or outline of a story. You can do this with a detailed synopsis or description of the plot. So, you can do this a few ways. You can either do like I used to do. I used to have this program on Amazon that had blocks, and you could put text within the blocks, and I would take each chapter and put like a brief summary of what the chapter was about. You could do it that way, or you can do it chapter by chapter, like an outline chapter by chapter, and each chapter that you write, you would write what that chapter's about, a short paragraph of what it's about, and with each paragraph you should have like some kind of short conflict within that paragraph. Like it could be simple as like trying to make a decision or trying to solve a problem, or execution and resolution of a battle, like on a battlefield. That would take up a whole chapter to describe the battle, maybe even farther if it's a longer battle. Depends on, what you're writing about. Like a lot of the stuff I'm writing about has to do with battles. So battles rage on. I mean, sometimes they last hours, sometimes they last days. So who knows, And basically, that's what you want to do with the outlines, is you want to detail each part of your story. Now, as you get writing more and you get more used to it, you'll find sometimes you'll want to go deviate from that and come up with your own ideas within the guidelines of your outline, which is fine. Or you could ditch your whole outline and just go in the direction you want to go in. But I wouldn't suggest doing that as a new writer. As a new writer, it's best to follow some kind of structure. And, not that that's not structured. It is structured, but it's structured in your mind instead of on paper. And it's a lot easier to lose things in your mind than on paper. So it's better to get like important information down on paper or on computer or whatever you're using. Anything you feel is very important. You need to, even if you are doing it off the cuff, you want to keep that information available. Okay, so that's enough about the outlines. And I also wanted to talk about types of authors. There are a few types of authors out there, and you're probably one of them. They have to be either one of these, or you may be a different kind of author. Who knows? But one of the authors is authors who don't write. And I used to be like this myself. I would say I'm a writer, but I would write maybe once a month, or maybe even once every 4 months. And that is not a writer. That's just somebody who likes to dabble with the writing, doing it from time to time. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do. But it's never going to get you just writing books or anything like that. But they do the time when they're motivated. That's the way people are. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's good therapy. Even if you don't do it all the time, it's good to do that for therapy. And then the second type of writer is an ambitious writer, this is the author that I am now. And I just love to write. And living in the world, you almost live in your own world, I mean, you get away from the real world and into your fantasy worlds and sci-fi worlds. It gets to be pretty interesting. The imagination and where you can go with that. Okay, and you're not motivated. This type of writer. Like I'm myself. I'm not motivated by money. You're motivated by writing. And that's what you like to do. I mean, you do it for the love of writing. You don't do it for the money. And that's just the way it is. And you hope someday you might have a big head, but and you just gotta wish for whatever you can wish for. Okay, and then there's which brings me to the next one, which is the bucket list writer, and this is the writer who has written one book just to do it. They said that's one of my things in my life. I want to write a book, so I'll write a book. And that's what they do. And then they may never write another book again. And they're not motivated by money either. They're just motivated by what they feel when they've accomplished something. So that's that. And then you have the self-absorbed authors, which are people who refuse to accept criticism. Their book is terrible. They've gone to every agent. They told them they don't want it. They've self-published it, but it's full of errors. And everybody can see the errors. They can see the problems. It gets nothing but bad reviews. And that's the type of author who is his own worst enemy, because he is just, he cannot accept that people don't like his book, and that is just hard for any author to deal with if they're like that. Okay, and then you have the best-selling author, and this is the experience. This is not me, by the way. I don't have any best-selling books yet. I'm still trying, but the best-selling author is an experienced author who has worked hard for his success, and maybe he's worked with a certain publishing company. Maybe he's self-published and then he got noticed being self-published, like Andy Weir in The Martian. He was self-published, and then somebody picked him up later on after he sold so many copies. I think it's like 20,000 copies that you have to sell before a publishing company will even look at you. Which is that's hard. It's hard for an author to sell 20,000 books. I've only sold 500, so I mean it is hard for them to do that. So, but he is also the guy who's proven successful again and again. Example of this is like Stephen King. You're always going to get a bestseller. Bam, he gets a bestseller out. They ask him to do another. It's another bestseller. So, all right. Well, enough about that. The next thing I want to talk about is careers in writing, and this is something you can go to college for, or you might fall into it some other way. It depends on what you're looking for. And the first one is technical writing, which is it helps people understand technical instructions. And usually this is you have to go to college for this. It's usually like a bachelor's degree, and you have to write for like certain companies, and you have to take like physics and fluid dynamics and stuff like that to understand a lot of the technical or medical field. It depends on what you're getting into with that. Okay, and then the second one is a ghostwriter, and that could be you're writing under a famous name. I think J.K. Rowling has ghostwriters, and I think James Patterson sometimes uses ghostwriters. And I don't know. I guess there's nothing wrong with that as long as they don't mind, doing your work for you. But as an author myself, I would never get a ghostwriter. I would always write it myself. And it's just the way I feel about it. Okay, and then you have copywriters, which copywriters are you basically are hired by company to add content like travel magazines and products, stuff like that. You have to, and usually you can. These are the type of jobs that you could probably get without a college degree, and you could probably get online. But some of them ask for some type of writing experience. So you have to have some kind of established writing experience to get into these, but you don't need any college degree or anything. Okay, same with novelists. I mean, a novelist is basically anybody who wants to write fiction. If you write a fiction story, you're a novelist. So, I mean, it could be even self-published books, And then, the next one we have is a poet. And that's basically self-explanatory. Somebody writes poetry, poet books. And then we have a story writer that, writes articles and short stories for books and magazines. I have a friend who's an author who writes shorter stories for anthologies and stuff like that. They're a little less than a novella. Some are a novella, some are a little less. I think he writes as low as 5,000 words to 30,000 words, depending on, and sometimes a little more. Okay, and then you have, that goes for like sci-fi magazines, travel magazines. You might write a story on somewhere you've been, stuff like that, And then we have a lyricist, which is basically has to do with music, and I've written a few songs myself, so I know how that is. You write the music, write the words to the music. Okay, and then you have a screenwriter who writes plays and scripts for television and movies. And I envy anybody who can do this, because I don't know the first thing about writing a script. And I wish I did, because I would do that to convert my stuff to send to movie producers or something like that. But I may someday hire a screenwriter or try to look for one. If I can get the funding for it. Okay, here's the next one is a biographer who writes memoirs for himself or for other people. That's self-explanatory. If you're writing about somebody. And then there's an editor who edits the material sent by other authors and reviews it. And then you also have a critic or reviewer, which is somebody who writes articles about movies, plays, or literary works and reviews them. And then something I used to like to do in college was a researcher, where you gather information for other writing purposes. Like if I'm writing, I was in paralegal school, and I used to have to write briefs, and we'd have to do the research on the cases, and that was a lot of fun, looking up the cases and trying to apply the cases to our own brief. And it was pretty interesting. Okay, then we have an historian, which is somebody who writes about factual events in history. And then there's a blogger, which we all know what bloggers are. They're people who write about various topics, usually short, and they're no longer than a page or two. So, they can be about anything. It can be about sports, it can be about science, it can be about politics, whatever they decide to blog about. Okay? But a lot of authors have blogs as well. I mean, I have a blog on mine. I haven't put a lot on my blog lately, but I used to put like science articles all the time on it. Now I kind of just share them on Facebook and stuff like that. Okay, and then you have a columnist or a journalist, and this is what I went to school for a long time ago, was journalism. And you basically write for newspapers or magazines on various news stories and stuff like that. Okay, and that's that. And also, I'd like the next thing we're going to talk about is conflict in the story. Okay, in every story, there's a conflict or quest to be achieved. As an author, you must create an issue that will grab the reader to read your book. So you have to have some kind of problem from day one. There's a problem created, and you have to figure out how to solve it. Okay? And as an author, you will have to grab your reader with an external or an internal struggle between the main character and outside forces. Now, these outside forces is the old man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself scenario. And in the man versus man scenario, the main character is up against another entity or enemy, and it's usually a good versus evil scenario, usually, but not always. I mean, sometimes you could have two people that were best of friends, and they have to compete to do something else, you know. But there's always that level of competition between the two main characters, whether they're friends, whether they're foes, whatever it is. There's always a connection between the two of them. Okay, and in man versus nature scenario, the character is always up against circumstances beyond his control. The survival instinct kicks in. And I know a lot of this stuff is repetitive, but I said it when I did my introduction show, but I'm just kind of going over more in detail what it's about. Okay, and this is usually like, a man versus nature scenario is like hope. They gotta have hope to survive. Okay, and then there's the man versus himself scenario, where the character must struggle with his own shortcomings and faults to correct the situation. So for him to have a better life, he has to learn how to get to the next step. If he's addicted to heroin or something, he has to know how to break his addiction. And if the guy's abusive, he has to know how to break the abuse towards, whoever it is. But in a way, that's more than man versus himself with the abuse situation, because it causes other people involved in your conflict. But it is a struggle within yourself to be a better person. Okay, and the conflict must be clearly suggested in the first paragraph, and I can't stress this enough. If you want to grab a reader, you've got to give them a reason to read the book. So from the first paragraph, you have to grab the reader. So you're going to have to create a problem that's going to keep them right in there. Okay, and during the course of the book, the plot must progress towards a solution of the conflict. So basically, you'll have to, and I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm trying to talk loud, but sometimes I talk lower and it's tough to hear. Okay, and my wife says I mumble sometimes. It's probably true, I do. But, okay, so during the course of the book, the plot must progress towards a solution of the conflict. So as you're going through the book, you have to work towards some kind of solution. And, a lot of times you can be lying in bed at night and thoughts come to your head about your book. And that's happened to me a lot of times. and it gives me a way to get out of a certain situation that I put my main characters involved in. So it's that helps sometimes, and but in that first paragraph you could I skipped something here. In the first paragraph you can also use, to achieve this, you can also use foreshadowing. You can use going back to the past, something that happened, in reverse after the fact, and then going back about how it happened, however you want to do it, but you got to get the reader into the story. Okay? And as you progress and get the conflict resolved in the book, you have to picture yourself in the character's situation. What would you do? And that's basically it. I mean, you're writing the book and you're putting them in a situation. If you were in that same situation, how would you get out of it? Basically. I mean, and a good example of this is like, okay, you're an agent assigned to stop someone from assassinating the president. How would you stop them? You'd have to go out and find out who the person is, and stop them from shooting him, or even if you didn't know about it, you got to prevent the bullet from hitting him, one way or another. Okay, and that's basically all I have for tonight. I had to. Was quite a long class, so I had to cover a lot of material. Next week, we'll be talking about marketing, and I'll be showing you some spreadsheets on how to do like a budget for your books if you're deciding to make money with your books. How to detail everything. I mean, I'm not an expert at profit, but I can show you how to run a business at the very least. So, okay. And the other thing is, speaking of which, all this month I have a special. It's called the Starter Pack, and it has my 3 starter books, Dimension Lapse, from my Dimension Lapse series. It's the first one of that books. And then I have Margot Linden, Adventure of a Lifetime, which is the first of that 4-book series at the time, which is going to be a 6-book series. And then I have the side book of the Dimension Lab series called Tolkien Connection. And they're all available on my website at nicholas-t-davis-books.com. So, and that's all I have for tonight. And next week we'll talk about marketing and spreadsheets. Till then, have a nice evening, and we'll see you next week.